Welcome back to the boat shop, everyone. My name is Joe Buskins. This is our YouTube channel, Fish Bump TV. Today we are in episode 6 of our mold build for our T-top for our custom 29 footer that we run in our charter operation. Now this is going to be a detailed series, and today we are jumping right into spraying our tooling orange, which is a tooling gel coat. So we've already poured up about 24 ounces of our tooling gel, and we're going to be catalyzing that with a little bit of our MEKP 925. This is made by Norox, but any good MEKP. Now it's important to remember, if you're catalyzing gel coat, MEKP is what you're looking for. MEK is a different animal altogether and will not work for you folks. So we're going with about 12 cc's or so. I've already marked that off with my magic marker. And we're using a unique little gun today. It's like a cup gun. We can use these little disposable popcorn cups. And this thing has a very, very large diameter tip there that allows even thick gel coat to flow through. And tooling gel is gonna be thicker than your conventional gel coat. So you're gonna need something more than likely like that to get that going. We got our catalyst going in. Our drill sitting here on standby. We need a very, very thorough mix. But remember, the clock starts as soon as you put the catalyst in there, and you've got about 10 or 15 minutes tops with this material. Especially, we're in the mid 80s already down here. It's starting to feel like summertime. One more time the other direction. That ought to be good to go. All right, folks, here we go. Just that quick, we have those 24 ounces are gone. Now the surface is going to look odd. It's not a nice smooth surface. We're basically getting some gel coat on there. I'm going to give that a few minutes to kind of flash off a little bit. And what's happening is there's so much wax on that surface, it's causing the tooling gel to kind of bead or puddle. So I have found a lot of times you can get just kind of a mist coat on there, give that a few minutes to kind of flash, and then we'll come back with another coat. Here we go.
right, looks like it's gonna take one more shot. All right, we're looking for thin spots at this point. Now we're just kind of looking to see if we have any thin areas with a little bit down on that very bottom edge right there. Then we'll go around and hit it.
So we have finished up all that spraying. That was a little bit hectic. It's a hot weather, everything's curing really fast, and that little cup gun really dispenses that material at a high rate. Now it's been about an hour since we sprayed, and the tooling gel has fully tacked off there. And what we've done is we went ahead and prepped our materials. We've got an ISO tooling polyester resin. So this is a laminating resin, but it's an ISO, which is short for isophthalic. And that is what you're gonna wanna use if you're building a molded part. Now there are other resins you can use or work with. Matter of fact, we're probably gonna do a few layers with the ISO, and then we may actually switch to some of the vinyl ester for strength. So what we've got here, we went ahead and poured up about a quart or so of the ISO tooling resin. And as a general rule, remember that at about 1%, you're gonna need about 10 cc's of catalyst per quart. And we want this to kick pretty fast. So we've got nearly a full quart there. And I am gonna go with about, normally I like to take a marker and mark this. Oh man, getting old is tough. I think we're actually gonna go with about 15 cc's, so a little more, a little hotter than we normally do, but I want this to kick. We do not want this to be sitting on the tooling gel for a long period of time, because it can potentially dissolve or soften that tooling gel, and sometimes it'll make a little imperfection in there called an alligator. It'll kind of wrinkle the gel coat up. And you can see that we are using the dyed, so it's the same, it's the Norox MEKP, but it is the dyed version of it, so we can see what we're working with. We can see that we've got a good thorough mix. I'm gonna go ahead and pour this resin out. We're using a bigger roller today too. A lot of times, folks, I use a smaller roller, but for the sake of time today, trying to expedite things, we are not trying to drag this project out any longer. We want to do a good job, but we want to do it fast. Same for you folks at home. If you can work more efficiently, quicker you get your project done, the sooner you can get out on the water, get to having some fun. I'm gonna get some resin on everything. I like to, especially on this first coat when you're doing a mold, you want to be 100% sure that you've got a good bond under your glass. If you don't do that, you're gonna get little air bubbles, and the air bubbles sometimes over time will pop, and it will cause a little imperfection in your mold. All right, I'm trying to do this gently, and again, a helper if you have one is pretty nice. But you can see now we know it's gonna stay in the right position, and you don't have to worry about it torquing around on you. Same deal for the other side. Just gonna pull it back on itself. Get some resin out on the surface. And so what we'll do is we will go ahead and get ready. I want to be sure the pan is good and clean and clear. We'll work out any resin we have in our roller before we start our next batch. We want to get our roller good and dry our brush as well. That way when we mix a new batch, we're not cross-contaminating. I generally like to get some resin on everything. My dad used to tell me whatever is the whitest part, fiberglass is typically white, get some resin on that first and then kind of come around and get it elsewhere. Don't worry about the wrinkles too much. Sometimes that'll happen. But remember, there are binders in the CSM that your polyester resins and vinyl ester resins are going to melt. So, not going to be a big problem. You basically just get a little bit of resin on there, and as you give it a little time, it'll soften up the material, and you won't have any trouble getting it to lay down. I'll go ahead and give this thing a little haircut, just like so. Alright folks, so we have fully wet out our first coat of CSM or matte, and we are working forward with our second coat. And folks, again, normally when you're doing this, a respirator would be a great idea. I did turn our fans on. We've got a big open shop here. But if you were at home and not having to talk like we are doing the videos, I would definitely have a respirator on and some eye protection and some rubber gloves. Make sure you're taking care of your PPE. Again, as always, if you folks are enjoying the content and want to see the channel grow, if you got any other platforms you folks want to share on social media and whatnot, that is greatly appreciated. And the likes and the comments and all that tell the YouTube algorithm that we are doing a good job, and it's greatly appreciated. I know there's many ways that you folks could be spending your time, and if you're spending your time here at the channel watching these videos, that is awesome. I really appreciate it. And many of y'all know this isn't what we just do full time. We run fishing charters, and we're in that time of the year where things are getting busy for us there. We do have the Project Blazer that we're going to be working on as soon as this is done, but we've got to get some shade on our charter boat, and that's priority. But as soon as this is done, we're jumping back to our Project Blazer boat. All right, same deal. Nothing wrong with cutting the fiberglass a little long. So you can just use your hands sometimes to just pull styrene in. That resin is melting the binders in the CSM. Yeah. Again, there's nothing wrong with using a gloved hand. Sometimes you can just pull the glass from below and it'll stretch it into place a little bit. We do not want any voids, any bubbles like that right there. You want it making full contact with the mold, or else it will be a problem. Alright, got a little dryness up there. You can see these little white specks here in the middle. Yeah, little air bubbles at this point. Good idea to come along here and get a little bit of resin in there. Be curious to know what kind of project you folks are working on. I've been really surprised at different parts of the world we're getting comments from, and then I'm surprised at how many folks are working on campers or RVs or things other than boat stuff. That's one of the awesome things about working with these materials, is the range of things that you can build and work on. One more little pass all the way around This ISO resin from Fiberglass Warehouse really works nice. In the past, I've had some resins that after they've been applied on the surface for a minute, they get really, really sticky and they want to pull up on your roller. Not the case with what we're working here tonight, folks. So I got my little bubble buster roller. Folks have seen me use that little nylon roller, and that is a great little tool for working little air bubbles out. Some people just call it a hard roller or a thin roller. Yep, it's definitely starting to tack a little bit. You can see sometimes it will start to roll up on your hard roller just a bit when it's getting close. It's one more cool little trick. Got your handy razor knife, and the fiberglass has already started to tack off. Matter of fact, I might get my cameraman. I've already started to trim. If you catch the fiberglass at just the right time, it'll save you a lot of sanding, grinding, cutting. You can basically trim this. If you try to do it too early, it's going to pull the fiberglass back. If you wait too long, it'll be too hard and the razor blade will not cut it. And I always put in a really good, fresh, sharp razor blade, and honestly about 2 layers of CSM is about all it wants to cut. So you can't cut like a ton of biaxial and matte, but if you've got a couple layers of CSM, and then what we can do is we can kind of trim this on additional layers, and then when we're all done, we don't have a difficult grinding operation. You know, we got basically, it's trimmed right to the edge, which I'm pretty happy with that. So we went around that thing in like 2 minutes, whereas if you had to saw and cut and grind that, it would be a real bear. So we're all finished with laying up our layers of CSM. What we ended up doing, folks, on this layup was a total of 7 layers. We did 2 initially, and then we did a layer of 3, and then we did another layer, 2 layers, and we're moving on to a new material. This is called Core Mat. It's made by a company. Now this particular is made by Sphere Core. It's a 4mm, and it's kind of a unique material. It's perforated. You can see it's got lots of tiny little holes in it, and one side looks a little different than the other. On this side, the holes appear to be smaller. On this side, they appear to be larger. And I have always oriented it where we have the smaller holes down. That way, what we do is basically went underneath it, and then these larger holes kind of act as funnels, and it acts as a bulk material. It's almost like adding a core, so it's going to add a pretty good bit of thickness to this bottom panel, but it also acts as an isolator or an insulator from like any kind of framing or bracing, and it's used a lot of times in hull sides on boats to improve cosmetics, and it helps minimize where you might see bulkheads fit in and whatnot. So what I went ahead and did though is obviously it comes on a roll, and I went ahead and pre-cut all the pieces. We kind of cut them to fit, and I laid some little marks around the perimeter here so that I can see exactly where it's supposed to lay down. I put some marks piece to piece so we know where the orientation is, then got it blocked a little bit just so that it doesn't blow around. And staging this kind of stuff is real important. I think that's maybe an area where a lot of folks, if you're just getting into this, pre-cutting all your pieces, laying them out, and then having them oriented or numbered. Even a lot of times, even though today it's pretty obvious, like a lot of times I will take a marker and we'll just do a simple orientation, because you'd be surprised sometimes you can lose. So that would, the arrow, in the case of like working on a boat, that would always be pointing toward the bow or forward. So anyway, what we're gonna do, I'm gonna be mixing up some vinyl ester. This is one of my very, very favorite resins. A lot of people ask, like, if you're gonna have one resin around, I would go between either the vinyl ester or the ISO tooling polyester. Very, very good material. Vinyl ester is very, very strong, very waterproof. It's got a lot of qualities of epoxy, but also a lot of the workability of polyesters. And I'm going about 12 cc's or so. One thing we learn a lot of times is it is easier to leave the material in place and just wet underneath it, is the way I like to go. And we're gonna wet it quite heavy. Okay, so we're applying a little more resin here. This stuff kind of soaks it up as you go. So I like to kind of get some resin on there and then give it a moment to kind of marinate a little bit, and then come back and add, and it'll just kind of continue to soak. As always, folks, I want to thank y'all for tuning into the channel, watching, subscribing, sharing, all that good stuff. It helps the channel grow. The more the channel grows, the more of these kind of videos I can do. Get every little last drop. We're going to come back and we're actually going to mix up a little bit of thickened resin, and we're going to build up that edge a little bit so we have a little nicer transition. And as I mentioned before, the folks where we're buying this, folks, the folks at FIBERGLASS Warehouse, there is a discount code now for viewers of the channel. It's FishBump TV. There's a discount code there for you folks, about 15%, which is a pretty nice little discount. Go there and maybe stock up a little bit. I highly recommend, if you've never done much fiberglass work or any at all and are interested in learning, nothing wrong with getting yourself a gallon or so of material and some fiberglass and some different just random supplies. Matter of fact, I've been thinking of putting together a kit, if you will, maybe my recommended putties, fillers, and glass that you'd want like in a starter kit. Kind of get you folks rolling in the whole fiberglass and composite world. There's so many things you could build outside of the boat world even. Definitely, with the cost of things these days, if you can find a way to do it yourself, or maybe even things around the house or on your boat that have been damaged and need to be repaired rather than throwing them away, see if you can't repair it. All right, folks, I want to show you guys how we're going to make some putty for filling these edges. We've got I took all of our gallon jugs of the vinyl ester and poured off about a pint or so, half a pint. And what we're going to be doing is making a filler for this hard, that crisp edge. Now that's still in the process of curing there, but I want to kind of transition that and smooth that down a little bit. Now I'm going to be mixing some of this silica. It's a very, very fine dust, so you're going to want to wear a mask when you're working with this material. It takes quite a bit. I usually start with nearly equal volumes. I like it somewhere around the consistency of a creamy peanut butter, typically. That's about what we're looking for, folks.
That is a wonderful material for filling in little gaps and edges. Again, you could do the same thing if you were using epoxy. And West Systems makes another one, I believe it's their 404. It's their microfibers. And that'll add some strength too if you got some seams or creases or gaps like between panels. If you say, for example, had Cusa board or plywood that abutted together and you wanted to fill that seam or that crack, the colloidal silica and some microfibers. Now at this point, once the silica has been kind of mixed in, obviously you got some fumes just from the resin itself, but it's not near as dangerous as the silica itself as far as not wanting to breathe it. It's about as much as I like to work with at any given time. Flexible spreader blade. We'll make a little divot right there in the middle, make a little pond, and we're just going to put a, oh, I don't know, that's just a cc or two, I would imagine. Gonna turn it over on itself. Good thorough mix. Even if you're not exactly right on your catalyst ratios, folks, as long as you've mixed it real thoroughly and you get some catalyst in there, it'll eventually kick off. Although again, we want to kind of hold at that 1 to 2%, pretty good place to be. Seems like the vinyl ester maybe needs a little bit more. And our resin has tacked off at this point. It's still got a little stick to it, but that's why you want a laminating resin, little putty right there, and just draw it right on around. Let's get some on the like to get it on there before the resin dries just crispy hard. I feel like you get a better bond, and if there's any little burrs or ripples on there, it'll kind of knock them down. Just draw that right along. Pick up the excess. Isn't that nice? Look how pretty that cleans it up. So our thickened putty has cured, and you can see how nice that looks there. That kind of gives you a good transition between the solid fiberglass and that 4mm core mat we used. And you can see we went ahead and jumped ahead and we put some bracing on here. Now this is just like a standard, like a yellow pine. It's kind of a construction grade stuff, although I went and picked some nice true straight ones. And this was a 2x6. I just ripped it in half. And we just put a little bit of resin underneath either end here and resin coated it. And we want to add a little stiffness to this panel, and something like when we're setting it on the floor or on a table, laying it up, we want it up off the floor just a bit. But you got to be real careful when you're adding bracing or framing to a mold, because if you put too much fiberglass or too heavy of a framing, it can imprint through the mold and actually even distort it. So that's one reason we're using this 4mm core mat. It acts kind of as an insulator or an isolator. And we are going to be putting just one layer of 1 ounce CSM just around this, but it's very lightly held in place, so it will add stiffness, but we're not trying to add so much glass that would pull the mold around. And we're going back to the ISO tooling polyester resin, and again, the tooling means it is designed for mold applications. Of course, you can use it for other stuff. R29 is built completely out of ISO. And ISO is the isophthalic, which is a higher caliber polyester resin. If you're going to use polyester resins, I really like the ISO. That's kind of what I recommend going with. Now, normally, and you folks can see, we did radius the top of this, but I did not put any kind of a putty or fillet in the corners. That is just because this is tooling work or mold work, and I don't want to risk drawing or imprinting. So we're just trying to add a little stiffness, but the radius in the corner, not really necessary for this application. But if you were putting stringers in or any other structural application like repairing a boat, you would always want a nice fillet, like a structural fillet or a putty down in the corners there for that transition. But for this particular application, not
necessary. And we're just gonna lay our mat. We're gonna do 3 pieces total, 1 on either side, and I'm gonna do one to cap it. We tore this on our table. I like the torn mat because it gives you a really nice smooth transition. You don't have a hard edge. It kind of feathers the material out a bit. And I like that. That just makes it look nice and professional. There we go. We're gonna take this big roller, and I kind of like to get the corners first. Now, some of you folks have been following the build, and obviously building a mold for something like this, some folks are curious, why would you do this? And you certainly could just build like a one-off and make just the hard top yourself. But a mold usually is going to produce a higher quality part, and sometimes you can get shapes that you can incorporate when you're building the plug that are easier to transfer to the mold, and you can mold more complex parts than sometimes what you can build just as a one-off. But I've actually got a framework over here in the background, and on my previous boat we just bent some foam core and fiberglassed it on either side and cut it to shape and built a pretty simple hard top that way as well. But just use your imagination. A lot of what we're doing on this build, you could transfer a lot of the techniques and a lot of the materials we're using could certainly be translated to a one-off. Get a little bit of resin on everything. I'm going to come back with our brush and do just a touch of dabbing. You can see that matte or CSM will make that transition. Pretty much only use a brush in our shop though for mixing resin and dabbing in corners. Pretty much going to be the only application. Okay, so now we're going to cap it. We rolled from one side, rolled from the other, and just going to run that right down the top of this thing and split the difference. And then we're just going to do a little cap right there on the ends. That took about a full quart to do that one runner right there. And that honestly should be enough for something like this. I'm going to try to do an update. I know a lot of folks have expressed some interest in seeing more information about when we built and designed the 29, and obviously it's a more complex mold for that hull, and it's got more bracing but the same principles. I would recommend starting with something small if you've never built a mold before. Something like a hatch or a console, even a hardtop mold. Certainly something that most people with some basic skills could do. All right, and see the brush is really good for these smaller areas and kind of dabbing it into tricky spots. All right, folks, so we have finished glassing both of our runners there, or stiffeners, on top, and we are now adding one more layer of 1-ounce CSM or matte, just that transitional area kind of between where the core mat ends. That's going to give us one more little bit of stiffness on the edges of this mold as well. That's going to give us a total of 8 mats on the mold edge, which should yield a pretty generous 1/4 inch or so. And I did come back and I wet out this rest of the core mat a bit with a little more resin, but the core mat on top was again basically to act as an insulator and just a bulker. Now if you were laying up a boat in a mold, sometimes it'll be put inside the mold just behind the skin coat, and that helps minimize what they call print through for all your framing and whatnot. So we'll probably come back in the morning. There's just a little bit of glass hanging over the edge. I can use a razor blade to trim that up. But to kind of recap for you folks, when we were spraying the tooling gel, this is the Shield Vinyl Ester Tooling Orange, the VE Orange. And then generally when you're building the molds, the ISO Tooling Polyester, which I really like this as a general all-purpose. And then we plan on actually building the top with the Vinyl Ester laminating resin. And the folks there at Fiberglass Warehouse, I've really been happy with the products we've been using from them, and all the things we're using, they should have available. So you guys know how much I appreciate you watching the channel, following along. If you haven't already subscribed, if you want to see us do more of this kind of stuff and you have other platforms you want to share our content on, it is greatly appreciated. So it's Captain Joe here, Island Marine Charters, Fish Bump TV, my awesome cameraman working hard behind the scenes, and we will catch you guys next time out.